Hello Natroners, and welcome back to another episode of VFX with Natron. So, I'm just realising my hat's on a little bit off. There we go, that looks a little better. Alright, so today we're going to be doing something a little bit, we'll call it sketchy, a little bit off. It works. I'm not going to say it works perfectly, or at least it's given me a bunch of lip doing this, but this was a request from a user on Facebook. Somebody asked a really interesting and good question. How would one go about making objects like text or anything follow a path or a roto path? And so that is a really good question, because there isn't something that says take this object and put it on the path. So I'm going to show us this actually occurring inside of Natron. I'm going to show it working. In fact, let's just pop over to here, and we're going to look at this. And as we can see, we have a little sailing ship. Well, this might be actually the sailing ship that we're probably going to be using this in our map at some point. But what I wanted to do is really emphasize, and I realized after I did this that I needed to emphasize the path, and it anyway, it's a long story. You can see that the cyan stroke is actually a roto path. That is a roto draw path, and the boat is following it, and it is rotating along it, and it's going along and rotating around just as if it were actually following the path itself, and it is following the path. But anyway, so the question is how do we go about that? And we're going to recreate this from scratch. I'm going to just pop this over here to the side because this is my reference project. I did not have time, due to other things going on in my life, to render this out for today. So here we are in Natron, and I'm going to just bring this back down. All right. So, how do we start this in a Natron project? So the first thing we need to do is obviously we need to add some form of roto. We can either use a roto node or a RotoPaint node. I highly recommend RotoPaints are really designed to do paint work. They do lots of extra things in addition to just strokes. But we're going to put down a roto paint roto, and then we hit P for paint, and then we look at this. All right, so we need to first draw something. We need to draw something for our object to follow, and the way we're going to go about this is it defaults to using over here using the pen tool. Well, we don't want to use the pen tool because the pen tool, it's weird to me, because to me a pen tool and a pencil tool are two different things. Pen tool to me, usually in most things, does your curves. But in Natron, the pen tool is actually the equivalent of a pencil tool in most other programs, where the pencil tool is where you draw freehand stroke. The pencil tool in Natron is actually the one we really want. So if we long click on this, and we can see that it starts off, it says, oh, excuse me, it was a solid paintbrush tool, excuse me. And now it's the pencil tool, and the pencil tool is what we really want. And so what we need to do is we need to draw down something. Now, this may or may not draw properly on its first attempt. We're just going to draw something simple. We're going to keep this simple because I don't want this to get too complex. So we draw this down and we click off of it, and we'll notice the first thing is that it is not drawing. And this was one of the first things that I was like, why isn't this drawing? This has never given me lip in the past. And it turned out that I tried half a dozen things in order to figure out that all I had to do is move forward one frame and then move back a frame, and it just, sometimes it doesn't, Natron just does not want to draw this right, no matter what happens on this. So I found that by closing the node, selecting it again, and then double clicking on it, okay. I don't know why it's doing it, but I tried a bunch of things. It actually, I think what ended up working is I changed my brush size. So we go over here to stroke and we change our brush stroke, and there we go. It's drawing it now and everything's fine. Don't ask me why it's doing this. Just a weird, fluky, buggy thing. It's minor in the big thing. The key thing is we actually do want to set our brush size down to size of 10. We don't want to, the reason is we're going to be putting tracker nodes on top of the big giveaway. We're going to be tracking this. But there's more to it. A lot of people don't know how to use the tracker node. The other thing we're going to do is if we look at this stroke, at this brush stroke, let's close this again temporarily. If we look in at it, we can see it's very soft on the edge. It's very, close this. We're going to keep two properties up because we're going to be using that for our tracker. So when we zoom in and we look at this up close, we want to bring the hardness up because we're going to be making this into a very hard line. So we're going to bring this up to 0.8 for our hardness. I don't want it to be super hard, but I want it to be much harder than it was by default. So we're going to fit that. And there we go. There's our initial stroke. Now, the first thing we need to do with this stroke to make this work is we need to give it a time frame to work against. So we're going to just use our entire timeline. I'm going to make this, we're going to bring a ship in, a little ship that we saw here, and I'll upload that for people to be able to download. I will also, that is actually from, that is a piece of open, well, that's a modified version of some open clip art. I modified it, turned it into a pirate ship. But I will try to also link to the original because I believe in giving reference to the original source, and I've forgot to put it into my project for today because I've been very busy. Anyhow, but so how are we doing this? How do we get we can track things. People probably know I said tracking, so might as well get into the nitty-gritty. Tracking. How are we going to track this? We're talking about tracking something that is more or less a stroke. Well, what we can do in Natron is we have this property here called, on the stroke panel, called visible portion at start, or visible portion start. And we have a start point, or it's just a, let me rephrase that. It's visual portion start and end. Okay, and so this is a value from 0 to 1, and this is also a problem because this is a floating point variable. It's not an absolute thing, and so the length of our segments actually dictate how long the path is. The path is basically it will speed up and slow down based off of however many points you have in their relative locations. So a very important thing to realize is that when you make these strokes, and you want to try and keep if you want it to work uniformly, you want to try and keep the stroke points distributed as equally as possible. So we have a situation where these are close, but this one is far. So back over on this end, it's going to actually move a bit faster than it does at the beginning. Even though we're going to do, we can animate the, actually, I don't know. I don't know if we can animate the speed of it. We'll focus on that afterwards. I think there might be a way to modify that. Anyhow. So we said that, or I said that this is a 0 to 1 property, which means this is also going to be affected by the resolution of whatever our frame is, however many decimal points we have in here for the visible section. Now here is a catch. Found that this doesn't, for some reason, like to get tracked if you make this too small a floating point number. I don't know why, but if we make this too small a number, it gets unstable. So I don't recommend ever going below 3 decimal points worth of value. This could, don't ask me why. We're just going to chalk it up to that's the way it is. So how do we do this? How are we going to make a point that we can track? We're going to set the second point here, the end point, to 0.001, okay, which is the smallest point of three decimal points. So we sit there and we do that. And if we zoom in at the very beginning, we can see that now we have a dot here. And that is the beginning of it. So then what we're going to do is go to the last frame of our animation. Okay. And so now we're on the last frame. And what we're going to do is, oh, we need to also, wait, we need to go back to the beginning again. Sorry, we forgot one step. We need to right click in the visible portions and we need to set a keyframe on all dimensions. Then we go to the last frame. And now for this, we're going to set the end to 1 and the visible point start to 0.999. All right. And we can see that that puts the dot at the end of our line. And so now if we were to scrub through our timeline, we can see that we have a dot that is traveling the length of our entire line or our entire curve. So that is how we get a point that we can follow. Now what we're going to do, of course, an object won't follow this by default, so we obviously have to track it. So how do we track it? Well, before we track it, we have to address another problem, which is we want this to also track the rotation, and a single point for tracking purposes won't give us offset information for how things rotate. So what we need to do is go back to the beginning here, and we want to do or clone this by hitting Alt and then hit K to clone our Roto. And then what we're going to do is we're going to basically merge this in with itself. So we're going to go hit merge. We're going to put this in the Roto, the clone of it, over into the A input. And then what we're going to do is we're going to offset this in time. Now, it's very, 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 or at least it's been my experience, it's very important that when we do this, that the object or the points that we track remain isolated, and they also need to remain different colors. Now, it's really easy. The good news is this is really easy. We don't have to do any crazy wonky stuff or even unlink stuff from the clone, because the RotoPaint, if we go back to the general, one of the things we can do over here, let's go back. For some reason, I'm not seeing our points. Oh, yes. There's a reason for this. Let's turn off our overlays for the moment so that we can see this a little bit better. All right, two things. First, let's offset this. The way we offset this is with the RotoPaint, the clone selected, we're going to hit Tab and we're going to put a time offset. Time offset, there it is. We're going to set this into negatives. And by setting it into negatives, you can see that it moves it in a positive direction. And we're going to set it off, we're going to offset it by 10 frames. Okay, and that will put it right there. Now, as I said, the big problem, the problem we face right now is that both of these points are white. So if they're, as I said, because this is tracking, we're going to be tracking both of these. If they're moving very fast, or they happen to fall within the range of one another, Natron may get confused if both of them are white or the same color. So what we really want to do here is set one to one color. So what we're going to do is go double click on our RotoPaint node, and we're just going to go on the general tab, and we're going to uncheck the green and the blue channels so that we wind up with a red dot. And then for the RotoPaint 1, we're going to uncheck the red channel and the blue channel. And that way we wind up with a green dot. And that way we have isolated these two things. So Natron, when it's tracking these 2 points, is not going to get confused by which dot is which if they happen to pass in front or into the same proximity as one another as they're going. Because we want to keep them relatively close. They're actually going to, basically our object is going to wind up somewhere in between these 2 points. And it's also, I want to point out that it's very important that the one that is time offset happens after it happens or starts off offset, because Natron also gets wonky if it's not offset at the beginning, or at least that's been my experience. So make sure that you offset it in a negative value, not in a positive value, because negative, you're basically saying, I want this one to start, in time, offset. I want this to have started basically offset in time 5 frames ago. So it's basically moved 5 frames out. That's what the negative means. All right. The next thing that really helps this, because tracking for some reason can have really, really weird and weird results if we don't do this, we want to cache this. I don't know why the Natron doesn't like it, but Natron can be... I've gotten inconsistent results with this if I don't cache it. So we're going to put a disk cache in here. So we connect the disk cache and we just leave it in its defaults and we connect it up. Now, this is the point where we're going to actually insert our tracking node. So now we're going to hit tab and we're going to put a tracking, and we're going to put a tracker down here, and you'll notice that our tracker is not connected. So we have to connect our tracker to the source, to our disk cache node, and then connect that out. And when we double click this, we want to add a track. Now there's a couple ways we could go about this. One is we could hit this plus up here and add a track like this. And we can just click on that one time, and if we click here, we should wind up with it. And of course, it didn't work. All right, let's try that again. One more time. Click. Nope, it's not working over there. I've had this happen. This is one of those weird things. If that doesn't work up there, then what you do is you click down here. You can click on the actual roto, or on the, excuse me, the tracker node. We click on this plus sign, and that adds a track. And we can see that it's not showing up for some weird reason. Well, let's try this again. Let's zoom out. Oh, I know why it's not showing up. Because we have our overlays gone. There we go. That might have been why it wasn't working in the other one. All right. Sorry, that bad's on me. All right, so we can take this tracker and we'll grab the center point of it and drag it over our red. Let's zoom in on this because we want to get this as close to the center as possible so it tracks nicely. And we can see here's a nice close-up of it. And we should be good to go. Now let's add a second track, and that's going to, when you add them over here, they wind up in the center. So we're going to bring that over onto our green node, or onto our green dot, and just make sure it's nice and centered. That looks pretty good. All right, let's go back to track 1. So by default, if we start with the first frame, we don't have to do anything more. And I highly recommend when you're doing this, it just for some reason works better if you track from the very first frame. All right, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to fit this, and for some reason we've lost our tracking node. Okay, why did that? That's weird. Oh, all right, that's fine. All right, here we go. All right. Select our track. That's why. Because it's deselected, we just select our track over here and it puts it up over there. And we can see it up close. All right. So up here we have these options for tracking. All we have to do is click on this play forward. And when we hit track forward, this should, if everything works right, track this. And we should wind up. And of course, now Natron's doing its own thing and it broke. Oi, and when this happens, if this happens, then we have a real problem. This could be, we're going to delete this. We're going to try this again. We're going to go back to the first frame. We're going to add a new track. We're going to just take this track. We're not even going to do the second track yet. We're going to just do this first track. We're going to put this over this. Select it, get it right in the middle. And this is what I meant by this gets a little wonky. Natron gets finicky about this. If we put it over there, we hit play forward, and it's going in the wrong direction. I really wish I knew why Natron did this. I thought I had it figured out. I thought I knew what it was, but apparently this is not. I'm going to tell you, if this continues, the only way I've found to reset this, or to fix this, is to reset the node. And I don't want to do that. I really don't. So, or reset the entire node graph. And this should work. This should work. Let's try a couple more things. Let's set our frame to the current frame. Why is it on the frame 4? All right, we don't want that to be frame 4. We want that to be frame 1. Go back to frame 1. put this back here. Let's remove, all right, we're going to delete that. Let's reset that. And we're going to try and pull that around, get our first frame. Come on, Natron, don't fail us. We want this to work. Oh, wait a minute. I skipped a step. I know why this is not working, or I think I know why this is not working. We need a constant in here. One of the other problems that I found is that if your ROD does not match the destination or the output ROD, and we can see our ROD does not by default, then we have a problem. So we're keeping this inside. So what we need to do is add a constant. We're going to add a constant over here. We're going to put the connect the B input of a merge to the constant. Take our A input, put it into the first roto, and then to the time offset. Now, hopefully, this tracker node, we may have to try this again. Let's see if this works better now. All right, ready and go. There we go. And we've got it, and it's working. All right, so just remember that you need your roto to your ROD to match the output of the output resolution for some reason, because the tracker does not like it if it's not. And we can see it's tracking away perfectly fine. And if we zoom out, now the reason this is taking so long here is because of that disk cache node. Yes, it took me a lot of troubleshooting to remember this or to get this to work, and I forgot the one crucial step, which is that we needed to work. Oh yes, and if you are going to do it, if you're going to have paths come up from off the screen, what I highly recommend doing is setting your resolution to larger, your project format larger than whatever you're going to be tracking, and then once you've got that done, then track do your stuff and then crop in on it afterwards. You can do that. There's easy ways to do that, but that way your track will follow it at the beginning. You just need to make sure, because the tracker node, for some reason, it just works with I don't recall seeing a spot where you could define a project size for it to work with. So it works with whatever your project setting is, and it needs to match whatever it's tracking. And that's why we had to do what we had to do. So if you want it to be bigger, for example, we're doing 1080p. If I want, I could set it to 4K, for example, UHD, and then track along in there so it's bigger and then crop into the center with using something else. And then after it's all done tracking, put it in. But I need to make sure that my constant that's defining, that's defining the area that my object's being tracked, or the path points are being tracked on, I need that to match whatever my original source animation size is going to be. All right, or track size. So that's one of the crucial things. There we go. All right, so we've tracked the first point. Let's go back and to the beginning. And the second point, because now we've cached this, that the reason it was taking so long was because of this disk cache. Now we're going to add the second point on. We'll just pull that over here, and this should work much, much faster if everything works right. Oh, come on. Getting a little bit of a lag here. There we go. And my computer's doing a bit of calculations in the background. It's probably not overly happy with me right now. So, okay, there we go. So we're back on the first frame. We did this. Also, I want to know that I want to point out the biggest reason that I recommend doing all your stuff on the first frame is because with your roto node, if you modify your path, your path will animate if you animate it or change it on any other frame. So your path will move all over the place, and then it causes all kinds of extra issues when you're like, why isn't my path working properly? And that would be why. So it's best to do everything on frame 1, get it all set up, start tracking it from frame 1, and then do anything that you need to afterwards. So as I say, this is not exactly the easiest thing in the world, but let's start tracking the second one. So we have our second track selected, we go up here to the top, we play forward, and as you can see, it's going a lot faster. Why? Because it's already cached the frames. Now, the reason that we needed that disk cache is because the cache, for some reason, despite using a constant and having all these things go together, the problem is that Natron doesn't treat certain types of objects as or certain types of drop nodes as actual images. It doesn't composite it into an image unless you use the disk cache node, and for some reason the tracker does not like it if these are not cached in some way, or not actually physical images, physical cached, you know, fixed resolution things. So we need to use that disk cache node to get everything sort of baked into place. All right, so now we've tracked everything. We've tracked our 2 points. Now that we've done that, what we can do is we can put in our scene, or start building our actual scene that we're going to use. So how is our scene going to be? What we're going to use for our scene is we're going to make a solid over here. We're going to put a we'll just use a constant. It doesn't matter. We'll set our constant to 1. We'll connect our viewer node up to it, and then we're going to put a merge node here. Now, this is where things are going to. This is another point where things are going to get a little wonky, because this particular image does not, the thing we're going to be tracking does not actually match our project size. I have it over here. I'm going to bring it in. It's called my ship. Put it in here, and as soon as I put it in here, I just need to minimize that. When I put it in here, it's connected up to the input, or into the second input of our viewer node. I'm actually going to connect it up here, and we're going to view it this way. So the first thing we see is that it has resized our project. So we need to hit S and pull up our project settings and change it from our output format, because I want this to actually be HD. I'm going to set it to my actual final output resolution, which means that, as we can see here, that this is not on top, and this is also the reason we put the white constant in there, or solid in originally. It was what I used. The reason we put it in there is because this is a black object and I want it to be visible. Also, the goal is ultimately, potentially, I might use this for, this is something that I'm planning on using on the pirate map, for a ship that travels across, and I might animate it this way. Probably not. There's other ways of doing it, but this is to solve the problem for people who don't know how to do this, or in case people are interested. And by the way, you can do multiple objects by offsetting them in time. In fact, we'll do 2 ships to just make sure. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make an object, a transform object, because this image does not, or this SVG in this case, does not have has position information. It defaults to in the bottom left corner. So what we're going to do is put a transform node on this, and this first transform node is going to be our initial position. And the thing we have to understand is that I like to, or I highly recommend, whenever you're doing doing something like this, to set up your transform so that set up your object so that it is going to be set to the center point of whatever your view is, because we want our transform. Well, hopefully this will make sense in a minute, but what we're going to do is just offset this. So I'm going to say, come over here, and I'm going to tell it that the reason is because our entire rotoscope, or our the tracker node, is working from the center point of whatever our scale is. So we need this transform to transform this object so that the center of it lies at the center of whatever our tracker is going to see. And this will make sense when we get to actually positioning this at the for the next part of the steps. It will get weird. You're going to see it in a minute. So what I'm going to do well, you know what? No, we're going to just leave it where it is for right now, just so we can, no, I didn't want to do that. All right. Here's the reason why. The reason that we don't want to offset, we want to do this now is because it makes it easier to visualize. Is that going to matter? Nope, it isn't going to matter. We're going to put in a second transform node for right now. So the second transform node, we'll let it screw up first so we can see the problem, and then it will make more sense. So the second transform node is going to be the actual one that it deals with the tracker data. So this first one is going to be our initial object position and transformations and rotations. And then the second one is the actual going to be the tracker movement to get it to follow the path. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually add a third one, which is going to be, because this whole thing is actually going to get shifted or offset, and it will make sense when it's done. We're going to shift the whole thing back at the end. All right, so let's continue. Let's see. All right, so how are we going to go about doing this? Simple. We're going to take, we're going to pull up our tracker node up at the top, and we're going to minimize this. We're going to first of all go over to the transform options here, and we're going to tell it that on this transformation node, or the transform options for it, we're going to tell it that we want to change it from corner pin to transform. And then we're going to change it from the motion type none to stabilize. All right. And what this is going to do is this is going to give us translation information for stabilizing something that is, moving. It's assuming that that point is moving. So it's going to counter that movement. And so what we're going to do is that basically has given us all this information that we're basically going to minimize, because all we care about now is this data here. And we're going to be putting it into copying this data or linking this data into our translate node. So we're going to just take this and we're going to hold down Control, and I'm going to go up to Translate X here for the tracker node. I'm going to drag from here down to our transform, which is going to be our transform 2, which is our second transforms translate. I'm going to just drag that down and connect it. I'm going to drag the other one down and connect it. So we've got the X and the Y, and then I'm going to drag the rotation down. Now, you can see that once we've done this, we can see that our object is tracking, but it's not lined up. All right. And by the way, this doesn't necessarily, because it's working here, does not necessarily mean it's working. Yeah, you know what? I think all right, I'm just debating about this. Let's see what happens if we offset this here. All right, so let's go back to the beginning. Oh, and we can see, we already saw that it didn't work. Actually, I might have transformed the wrong thing. All right, yes. So, it didn't work because, don't tell me I screwed up. Crud. All right. Don't do what I just did. I accidentally translated. We're going to relink that. So you're aware what I did is I accidentally modified the transform that was linked to the tracker node, and I hope I didn't screw up our information. So we're going to turn off transform 1. We're going to pull up our tracker node. We're going to relink it, relink, and relink all the three things. Oh, foo. I think bugger. I've already blown our whole thing because it's going to be moving over time now because it was linked to it. That is bad, which means our entire track has been thrown off. All right, well, I made a big fat boo-boo there, so let's go back to the beginning, and we're going to just toss our track. We got to start over. I hate to do it, but I made a very big boo-boo there. We need a tracker node. No, not a transform. Okay. I apologize. Let's put our tracker in here. And there's a reason that I have found that trackers become very, very unstable if you don't set them up correctly at the beginning. So let's make sure our transformations, this is good. It's very hard to reset a tracker node once it's been screwed up. So let's try this again. Let's close this. I apologize. That was a bad one on my behalf. I'm going to do it the right way this time. We're going to go click there, and we're going to click here. All right, we've got our two trackers. We're going to, by the way, if you do it this way, and the reason it didn't work before again was because we had overlays turned off. If you do this, this tool remains on. See how I have this green plus? If I keep clicking in here, it's going to keep adding new tracker nodes. You have to click on this again to disable it. All right, so clicking it once enables it, clicking it a second time disables it. So we've added our two tracker nodes. We're back at the beginning. Hopefully this is going to work. We're going to hit play forward. Everything hopefully is going to go. There it goes. Good, it's working great. We're good to go. We're going to just let that go and we'll fit it and hopefully everything will be hunky-dory and we'll watch our tracker. And I apologize. I'm very sorry, everybody. When I translated it because it was hard linked, I actually moved one of the points of our actual motion path at the end. That's why I had to basically, I could have redid the entire thing, and but I've had a lot of problems with this in the past when I was testing this, and I didn't want to deviate too much because sadly I wasn't positive that that was going to fix it, and I had some problems. But what we've done has, by doing it this way, we're going to guarantee we get consistent results. I will do more testing in the future. I don't usually animate this way or animate along paths, but I did this for this particular tutorial, and I want to make sure that what we get actually works. But that offset, what we saw on the offset, as we saw by trying to move the first thing, what we ultimately did is we caused a bigger problem. It actually did not actually offset our animation, or at least I don't think it did. Well, it may have been that I made a boo-boo. No, I really don't recommend. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if offsetting it, we might be able to offset it. Once this finishes tracking, sorry that it's taking a while. It's recalculating out our disk cache. There we go. All right, we're going to grab the second node, and then we're going to track that one. Oops, wrong thing. Oops, I seem to have boo-booed. Oh, we're at the last frame, that's why. That's it. Go back to the beginning, track forward, there we go. And it's taking a little longer this time. I must have cleared the cache. Uh-oh. Oh, that's not good. That's very not good. We wound up with the broken. And this is the type of stuff that I've had happen in the past. So we're going to delete that track. We're going to add a new one. I'm going to go back to the first frame. I'm going to grab that track, bring it over here, reline it. Oh, this should have been a nice, easy, simple tutorial, and it isn't. But so here we go. We're going to hit play. And there it goes. And it tracked perfectly that time, as we saw. All right. So there we go. We have our two tracks. They should be working. We'll go over to our transform. Now, oh yes, and we want to go back over here. and we want to, again, tell our tracker that we want it to be a transform. We want it to be stabilized. It calculates out our information. We go over to our transform. Interesting. Oh, yes. Let's fit this. So, all right. The first thing, the one thing I am going to do over here is I also want to shrink down our boat a little bit. I want this to be about half its size. And then we're going to go to our second one. And, oh, that's, all right. We're going to reset this so that it's not linked to anything. And then we're going to take our tracker, minimize it so that we only have those things. And we're going to link the transforms and link the rotate. And let's watch it. Let's go back to the beginning and watch what happens. And now it's doing some really wonky stuff. Okay, that could be because I set the scale here. Let's set this to 0. Oh, no, excuse me, to 1. Let's bring this back to the beginning and watch it. And as we can see, this is doing some stuff that looks very, very weird. We can see, all right, yes. All right, so this looks weird. Why is it looking weird? This is the problem. This is the reason we actually have that first transformation and why we don't want to mess with that second transformation. So the problem is that what it's doing is it's moving based off of the center point of our animation. So the tracking is actually happening way off. If we look at our original object, actually, if we look at our object back here, go back to the beginning. Let's go back here. It is translating this based off of the center point here. So because our object is back here, when it rotates, our pivot is at the center point for this transform. So what's going to happen is this object that instead of tracking to it, it is actually offset. And so what we need to do is we need to actually go back to our original object, and we need to reset its center. And so how do we get its center to match? Well, what we need to do is get this to the exact center of this. And the way we do this is we basically can take our resolution. So this is HD, so it's 1920. So if I take and I put 1920 and I divide it by 2, that gives us our halfway point, okay, which is 960. And then we can put 1080 divided by 2 gives us our vertical offset. And we can see that right now that shifted it basically to the opposite side. Well, the reason is because the center point of our object is offset. The center of this object, this is the bottom left. It has put the bottom left of our object off to the offset. So what we need to do is subtract our actual center points here from it. Don't change these, by the way. If you change these, it is going to, it's all that's going to do is make your life harder figuring this out. So we take our 960 and we put minus, and then we hit, I selected this 387 and I'm just going to paste it in there. I hit return and notice that subtracted it from it. And then I take this 230.5, select it, copy it, and I go over here to this. I hit minus on that and I hit paste, and that then has centered it. So again, our transform 1 is used to set up the initial position of our object, and it needs to be in the center of our working area so that it matches the center point of the tracker node. Okay, because when it does the rotation, that's where the point it's going to be rotating from. And so if we were, let's say this was not actually lined up correctly, and in fact it actually currently is not lined up correctly, because if we go back and we watch this again from the beginning, now when we watch it, we're seeing that, well, it's rotating and everything, but, and don't worry about those glitches, that's just a redraw issue. It's not actually, those glitches won't show up in the final animation. We can see that it starts off level, but it does not, it's not actually facing the direction of our actual path. And so this raises the question, okay, well, how do we get this to align with the path? Well, that is why we have our rotation. And you can see we're getting a warning over here. That warning, we'll deal with this stuff in a bit. We're going to do the final offset, okay, in a moment. Well, this is why we're actually going to, let's first get this so that it matches. All right, how do we fix this? We're going to hit, don't worry about the warning, it's minor. We're going to go back to our first frame. Underneath, with this second transform node selected, we're going to hit T to add another transform node. This is going to be our offset. This is what is going to be our alignment node, okay? Because this is now centered with what's already here. So just so we're positive we're working on the right one, I'm closing both our properties. We're going to double click on this and we're going to pull up our tracker node. All right. And when we pull up our tracker node, we want to make sure on our tracker node for tracking, we want to have the first tracker selected. Okay. And so when we do that, we see our first point. All right. So what we want to do is we want to get our object, our transform node, okay, to line up with that. All right. And actually, I take it back. We want to go back to our transform. We want it to line up with the transform of this, not the first tracker point. I want the first tracker point selected so that we can see the path, but we want to actually line up these 2 points. This is our transform node, our new transform node right here. And this is the transform that's happening from the tracker. All right. And the two need to line up with one another in order for this to actually follow it. So all we have to do is zoom in very, very close. Now, what I like to do is get into a point that it's smaller than a pixel, which is pretty easy to tell when you start dealing with bitmaps. It's a little harder when you're dealing with fonts. But we're at this point, you can see our pixels are pretty good size. So if I pull this in and I line it up, we should be within 1 pixel of error. That shouldn't affect it too much, but you know, we can go in even closer if we needed to and move it in. That's up to you. It's not going to do much of a difference. There we go. All right, so we're close enough. So now it's aligned. All right, so that's what this transform does, is it aligns it with the path. So now if we watch this, if we were actually play this and watch it, we can see that the boat is actually now following the path, but it's not rotating in the same direction. It's rotating, but it's offset. So to fix that offset, to fix the offset, what we need to do is we need to go back to our first transform right here, double click on that, which brings it up here. And then we need to just take our rotate on this, and we're going to use this to rotate our initial position. And we just sit there and rotate this in a positive direction. And that looks like that. What I'm trying to do right here is you can see there's a line here. Let's close this rotate node here. All right, we can see that this here, this line right here, this is the center point. I want to line that up with our tracker and with our tracking line. We can see it right here. It's kind of hard to see, but it's not quite there. I'm going to just go back here to the rotate here, and I'm going to just rotate that a few more degrees. And now it is pretty much aligned with it. We can see the line of this goes pretty much straight through it. So now I know that when this moves forward in time, let's fit this. I know that when it moves forward in time, that this is actually going to follow it. And there we go. Let's watch our entire animation. And it goes off the frame. Now, because of that, it also means that I want to shrink this. So I had mentioned before that it looked weird, and I thought it was all, I made a mistake by scaling it at the beginning. The reason it was off and it was going all over the place and it looked even more or further off than it really needed to be, was because I scaled it before I had done the positioning. And I highly recommend, make sure you do your translations for your node to get it positioned in the center of your frame before you actually do the scaling for the or the rotation of it, because it makes it a lot easier to get everything set up correctly. So now I can bring this down and I can set it to basically half its size or a quarter of its size or however big. Let's make it really small in this case. So we're going to go back to the beginning. We're going to turn off our overlays so that we can actually watch this. Let's hover over the center and hit spacebar, so go back to the first frame, and we're going to watch this from the beginning and just play through this, and we're going to watch this. Oh yes, and here's another nice thing about this, is that this also supports motion blur. So our actual the actual tracking node, or the node that is actually moving this, actually does support motion blur. So if we want to add, this is stuttering because it's a 2D element, and we'll watch it through this way, but and it's a little bit small now that I'm watching it, but that's fine. It'll update, it renders faster by doing it this way, and we can see that we're almost done. And there we go. We have it, and it's following our path. And it's following it, and it's rotating to follow the direction of the path. The only point where it gets a little bit wonky is right there at the end. I don't know if you saw right at the last few frames, and the reason is that the last 10 frames are actually off. So what I would recommend is also give yourself your buffer frames. Put 10 frames before your animation and 10 frames after it, and then for your entire frame range, and then turn on your object or turn it off or deactivate the path or trip it, you know, truncate it, whatever. You can make it basically so it stops. In fact, what we could do here is set a frame hold at the very last frame when it gets to 140 or 240, excuse me, which is 10 frames from 250. We could put a frame hold there, and it would basically stop the animation at that point, and our ship would basically come to a halt for the last 10 frames. But as it is now, we get a little bit of jankiness right here as we get close. We can see that right here at 250, it's weird because it no longer, it's fine right up. Let's see, it actually starts. We can see that as we get closer in these last few frames, we can see it starts rotating to the right because the distance between the 2 points is getting closer and closer. And so we lose those last 10 frames. Anyhow, so, and by the way, again, the ship is actually at the midpoint between those two. That's where it actually is animating from. So, just so we know. There's two more things we want to do. One is I want to demonstrate the fact that motion blur works. And by the way, this warning, all we have to do is hold down the Alt key and hit P, and that will, whoops, why didn't that work? That's weird. Alt P, there we go. To bring up the preview, and then Alt P again, that hides it and gets rid of any warnings or errors. It gets rid of those error messages off of the nodes, if you didn't know that from previous episodes when I've done that. So what we can do here is we can also turn on motion blur. Let's just, for the moment, let's just turn on motion blur very low, at its lowest setting. We're going to put it on at 0.1. And by doing that, let's go out a little ways. And when we zoom in on this, we ought to, hopefully, let's turn the motion blur off. We can see it's very, very subtle. But you'll see that this actually, let's turn it on a lot. We'll just put it on 1. We can see that it just became gray. And the reason is that it now has motion blur on. And if this were actually a problem, if there ever becomes a point where this is a problem, it will, it basically calculates that in, and you know, it will give us a little bit of a blur. So it'll look a little bit better. But we want this to be an armada of ships. We don't want just one ship. We want multiple ships. So how can we take this and do multiple ships? Well, that's pretty easy. The good news is that we don't have to do much. We've got this already done. All we have to do is at the end here is put some time offsets. So now I'm going to stipulate here for the purposes of this with the ship, we don't have to, we can keep the ship exactly as it is. We can In other words, here, watch this. We're going to put a time offset over here. Put a time offset. Okay. And I just take this time offset. Let me make sure that the text isn't over. We can just take that and we can put this into a 2. And then we tell it that we want this to appear, I don't know, this one's going to trail the other ship by a few frames. And there we go. It's offset by 22 frames. So now we can see that when we go back to the beginning, they both start off in the same spot. And we could just change its visibility. We could add something to a switch after it or something in there. But we can see, and here's the problem. Here's where they caught up to one another, because this is, again, it's not a perfect path. It speeds up and slows down based off of its distance. And in fact, we ought to see over here at the end when as it's moving. And by the way, this has motion blur on it. It's not very noticeable because, yep, and we can see this one's pulling ahead, so it's like a race. So be aware of that if you're doing text. Your points matter when you're dealing with text. And if it also means that at the beginning we should have probably offset this by at least 10 frames because they overlapped or not had the thing show up until 10 frames later. Trying to think of any other potential issues just to point them out. And by the way, this is not really a big deal. If I don't want them to overlap, all I have to do is increase the distance between them. Actually, we'd have to offset it by however big this number is. So now, there we go. Now it's 30 frames or 31 frames between the two, and we can see that offsets. Now, the other thing that we need to talk about quickly is what happens if this was a totally different object. Yes, this is great if we want the exact same ship following the other ship and so forth, and we still had some overlap, so we might want to change that even more. But let's say we were using text or where we want 2 different letters. Well, all we have to do is basically clone this entire chain right here. If this were a text node. In fact, let's just do that. Let's put a letter in here. Let's put some text in here. Let's put a text node in here. Let's put a big letter A in here. Let's go back to the beginning. And this, you know what? I'm gonna, because of what this was, I'm gonna let the text node get dictated by the read node so that it defaults to being. We're going to see that the text node, why is that not showing up? Let's see, focus. Show hide overlays. Reset center, there we go. Let's center interact. There we go. All right. The reason that it didn't is because we had already reset the project settings and it wasn't set correctly. And this, the reason I did this is because the text node, these transformations are all based off of, are all offset based off of this as being our source. So that means that our source resolution for our text has to be the same size as the source resolution for the actual ship itself. It's only because this particular input happened to be set up this way. That's the reason I'm using it. You don't have to do this if your project is the same, it happens to be the same resolution as, you know, your output format. The text node will default to the project size. All right, but we need it to be different. All right, so go back here. Let's go to our text. Let's change our text to a letter. We'll just put a S for ship, or no, we'll do a P. We'll just do a P. No. Yeah, we'll do a P. Why? Because we want a P for ship. We'll do 4 letters. So I'm going to clone this 4 times. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm not going to clone this. I'm going to clone these so that we can get 4, the 4, whoops, I didn't clone those. Those weren't clones. Those are duplicates. Those are copies. I wanted to hit Alt-K. Oops. Oh, yes. And we only want to do that. We can only, whoops. Let's grab that. Oh yes, and let's make our text, by the way, because it is white. Let's make our text a different color. Let's just make it, you know, I don't know. We'll make it magenta. All right. So that way we'll be able to read it without having to change either of the background colors. All right. So we're gonna so once you've made one copy of this, we can hit Alt-C to copy the cloned versions of these. And then what we can do is take our text node. I'm going to copy our text node because we want individual text nodes. And I don't feel like breaking it all apart. And we're going to just keep this simple. Don't do this. Normally you'd clone those as well, and then just break it apart. But for this source node, let's grab that, connect it up to text 1, text 112 right here. Then this one to text 122, and this one to 1222. Boy, if that isn't a mouthful. So let's give these the word S. We're going to go over to this one and change that from P to, so that's P. This is I because it's a second letter. There we go. Go to the third one. This is H. And then the fourth one will be S for ship. I know we're doing this in reverse direction, but that's because I started off offsetting stuff. We're going to put this time offset node here connected to the second branch. And now if we go back here and look at our start, it's going to look really, really small. But all right. That wasn't the best idea in the world. I didn't make those big enough. So let's figure out how big we need to make it. Let's make it like 300. All right, we need to make this. Go back here. 3, let's make it 400. Oops. Ah! No! Wrong thing. This is P, right? Yes, P. Sorry, 300. We'll keep it 300. 300 for the size. Go over to the next one. 300. This is the problem. This is why you usually clone. I got lazy and didn't think I was going to need to do this. And the other thing that we can do is go back to the first thing, and let's go back to our original, and that's good enough. All right, so let's go ahead in time to a point where we can see it, and then all right, so here we are. We're about part of the way into this, and we want right about here, we want this to be legible. So we take our time offset, and we just drag this back in time so that it's closer to the other one, and there we go, 16 frames. We're going to copy this, the time offset, so it starts off at 16 frames. Grab the input number 3 to our merge, and connect that in there. Now we should have the H, which needs to be offset, so we double click on this one, and we take it from 16, and we just back it up to about there. And then we take the fourth one, and whoops, wait a minute, where'd our fourth, what the heck? I seem to have, all right, let's copy that, put that there. I'd already done that. Oh, that's okay, easy enough. Connect that, and then take our S, make sure we double click that so we get this, and we'll increase that until we get the S8. There we go. So let's back this up and just take a look at how this looks. And we'll hit play. And all right, it's a little bit off. We need to back that P up a bit. Or actually, we need to back the other ones off. So we want to bring this back a little bit here. That means they're going to collide a little bit. We can animate, we could in theory animate this, but this just gets into the whole, you know, is this worth doing? I don't know. Well, we're going to let that, there we go. All right, so that should hopefully read better once it all forms. And this is why it's important. And as we can see, it's still not perfect. So it's very important that you find the right spacing for it if you're going to do text along a path. But we can see that it does indeed work, and that's how you could do multiple objects. And I think that covers about everything regarding this. Right. I'm going to bring back our original one, and let me run this like so. All right, so our goal today was obviously to do this, was to make this ship following a path, and we've done that. Took a little bit longer than I had expected due to some glitches, but now you guys know how you can make inside of Natron, how you can get an object to follow a path, or any number of objects following paths, or any types of path. The only other problem that we have, and I'm going to just switch over to me so that this isn't going, the only other issue we have is that if you wanted to do enclosed paths, that's a different story. You can't do enclosed paths because we can't stroke along. I mentioned this in the previous episode. We can't do strokes along a predefined path, or if it's an enclosed path. So if it's a closed path, you cannot stroke it, thus it can't work. So what you would have to do is you would have to basically butt the ends up and leave dangly bits and then figure it out and do all your math, and that would, be terrible, and I don't wish that upon any of you, but you can do it. It works. We saw it. It does function. If you follow the steps I did, and you use the disk cache node, and you put things in, and you remember that you keep the things ordered the way I did, and don't do what I did, and make the few screw-ups that I did in this video, even though I'd done it a half a dozen times, you should be fine, and this should work fine. And you should wind up with whatever you want. All right. And if you have any other questions, just drop a comment below, and on either Facebook or in YouTube, and I'll be happy to answer it. So thanks for watching. Keep on Natroning.